and ask whether this racist and fascist tale belongs on the Republican elephant, as is often alleged, or on the Democratic donkey.
You tweeted yesterday, the left-wing critics can only bash my book and movie by misrepresenting them. No dummies. I'm not saying Hitler was a liberal Democrat. Why did you tweet that out?
Because of a Washington Post article that basically says, hey, Dinesh claims that Hitler was a liberal. Now, this is a flat-out misrepresentation of what I say. What I say in the movie is actually much simpler and more crushing and factual. I say that Hitler and the Nazis got three specific ideas, destructive, genocidal ideas, either from American progressives or from the Democratic Party. One, Hitler was inspired by the Jacksonian Democrats of the 19th century. He said, just the way that they displaced the American Indians and took their land, I'm going to displace the Poles, the Slavs, the Russians, and take their land. So he explicitly drew from the Democratic example of the 19th century. A second example, we show this in the movie. The senior Nazis who made the Nuremberg laws, the laws that made Jews into second-class citizens, while they were making those laws, they had in their hand the democratic laws of the Jim Crow South. They had them. And they basically crossed out the word black, wrote in the word Jew, and they were off to the races. So I'm not just saying that the democratic laws and the Nazi laws are parallel. I'm saying the Nazis got it from the Democrats. Now, this is not in our textbooks. It's not on the History Channel. We don't hear about it. This is how progressive history has suppressed inconvenient facts that connect the Nazis to American Democrats and American progressives. So it's not as crude as Hitler was a liberal. I wouldn't say that. But what I am saying is Hitler actually, the Nazis were inspired in some of their concrete policies by American progressives and American Democrats, and that's a fact.
And why do you feel the need to write that and make a movie?
Because think about it. When today people use words like fascist, and they don't even know what they're talking about. They say things like Trump is a fascist because he was a nationalist. Now, anyone with any glimpse of history or with my kind of background knows, wait a minute, Gandhi, my countryman, was a nationalist. Mandela was a nationalist. Fidel Castro was a nationalist. Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist. So if nationalism equals fascism, all these people would be fascists. But that's nuts. So clearly that's not what fascism means. So I think if we're going to use these terms, and I don't mind using them, you have to do a bit of a deep dive into who were the fascists? What did they believe? So the reason I open up the history is the history illuminates the meaning of terms like fascism. Because you get all these sort of historians go, well, Dinesh just doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, the truth of the matter is, Dinesh is a revisionist. That's the big thing. And I am in a sense, but what I am revising is progressive revisionism. Because the progressives have told a story about American history. And that story is rigged to leave out inconvenient facts which have been suppressed. I'm just bringing those out. So, and this is both in the area of fascism and racism. So in the area of racism, we hear things like the party switched sides. The Republicans became Democrats. Nixon's Southern strategy brought the Dixiecrats over to the Republican side. Not true. Not true. And I can document it. So I do it in very simple ways. Let's list all the Dixiecrats. There are about 200 of them. These are people who joined the Dixiecrat Party in the 40s, or they voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A whole bunch of senators, a whole bunch of congressmen. Now let's count how many of the racist Dixiecrats became Republicans. Answer, out of 200, 2. One in the Senate, Strom Thurmond, one in the House, Albert Watson, and no others. Now, an historian at Princeton takes me to task. He goes, what about Trent Lott? What about Jesse Helms? What about John Tower? Well, those weren't Dixiecrats. So if you want to change the game, I'm happy to talk about it, but don't pretend like you're refuting me by giving straw man examples. Well, what I'm really doing when I list the Nazi platform is I'm basically saying, when you read this Nazi platform, is Nazism on the right, as we've all learned, or does it sound a lot like it's on the left? That's the issue I'm actually arguing about.
And when you say platform, you're referring to an economic platform?
No, I'm referring to the political platform in which the Nazis came to power. Remember that when Hitler was made chancellor in 1933, the Nazis were, by election, the largest party in Germany. So what did they campaign on? What was their platform? There it is. They lay it out. We show it on the screen in the movie. And so history is illuminating because in some senses, when we think today of Nazism, we only think about the Holocaust, the gas chambers, and that was 1945. But we also have to go back to early Nazism. Why did people find it appealing in the first place? And the answer was it was a collectivist ideology that was, in a sense, of a piece with progressivism. The progressives in America and the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany recognized each other as on the same side of the aisle, the left. Is that after World War II, the progressives who were coming to power in academia and the media, they knew the inconvenient leftism of Nazi ideology, but they didn't like it because they didn't want to be linked with them. So they began to sort of muddy the waters and try to move fascism from the left-wing column, where it always was, into the right-wing column so that they could now pin it on their political adversaries. That was what I call the big lie. Thank you so much. The pardon was fantastic. It was exhilarating, not just because I could now vote again and own a gun, but really because it gave me my American dream back. It kind of lifted the felon label that the left had sort of hung on me. So I'm thrilled about it. Look, I mean, there's an argument about all this. I remember when I went on CNN right after the pardon, they were like, well, gee, Dinesh, you got favorable treatment because some very powerful people like Senator Ted Cruz and President Trump got you off. And my reaction to that was, well, some very powerful people named Obama and Eric Holder got me in the first place, so it took some powerful people to get me and some equally powerful people to get me off.
And what were you convicted of?
I was convicted of exceeding the campaign finance law by giving money to a college friend of mine who was running for the Senate. Now, look, this is an issue of equity. I did exceed the campaign finance law, so I should get whatever penalty other people get who did that. But the problem is that no person in American history has ever been prosecuted, let alone convicted or locked up for doing what I did. Recently, Rosie O'Donnell admitted that she exceeded the campaign finance law on 5 occasions. Now, she did it out of, you may say, leftist enthusiasm, but in theory, there are 5 U.S. attorneys who could file charges, but none of them have talked about it. Why? This is not the kind of case that is normally prosecuted. But if you make a movie upsetting the most powerful man in the world, I guess I should have expected the empire to strike back.
And the movie, for those that don't remember or don't recall it?
That movie was called 2016 Obama's America. Came out in 2012. My first documentary film, the new one, Death of a Nation, my fourth. Provocative, we put Trump and Lincoln and morphed their heads in our movie poster for Death of a Nation. And some people do a double take. They go, how can you do that? Well, I'm not saying that Trump is Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln was brooding, he was philosophical, he was melancholy, and that's not Trump. But their situations are kind of similar. In 1860, an outsider, a Republican, was elected president in a very close race. And the moment that he got in, all hell broke loose. The Northern Democrats, some of them were openly calling for his assassination, which actually happened eventually. The Southern Democrats were so unwilling to abide by a Lincoln presidency that they were willing to break up the country. So there was a lot of craziness going on around Lincoln in 1860, and there's a lot of craziness going on in America today. A Republican president, Trump, an outsider, comes in, and essentially we've been living in abnormal politics for one simple reason, and that is that the Democratic left cannot accept the result of a lawful election. All this stuff about Trump being a fascist, Trump being a white supremacist, is essentially aimed at the media left trying to say, we get to trump the result of the election. It doesn't matter what the American people decide. Trump is like Hitler circa 1933, and whatever means that we use to eject him and get him out of there are fine. My only objection to what the left does to the movie is you have all these critics, and I wish they would, look, I'm releasing a movie in 1,000 theaters. Greta, if this was a normal America, I would be on Good Morning America, I'd be on CNN, I would be on The View, I'd be debating these topics. But as of this date, as far as ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC are concerned, this movie does not exist. They will not say one word about it. They're pretending like if they don't cover it, it's not a fact in the world. I find this appalling. This is what I mean by abnormal politics.
Because you're in 1,000 theaters? Because
No.
that's some sort of benchmark? I don't know.
Well, I mean, think of it this way.
Yeah.
Michael Moore's about to release a movie in a month. It's going to be in about 1,000 theaters. My movie, I've made 4 movies. My last 4 movies are all in the top 10 political movies of all time. So, in a sense, I'm on the conservative side, Moore's on the leftist side. The moment he releases a movie, there's an ocean of publicity because he is, in a sense, you may say, on the politically correct side of things. And all I'm saying is, I'm demanding a right to be considered and for my views to be debated. I'm not saying I have a right to be I have a right to be on CNN. No, I'm just saying if the ideas here are worth debating, let's debate them. Well, Dinesh, what makes you think that the Obama administration went after you? You know, you made a stupid movie, and how do you know you even saw your movie? Well, the reason I think that is because when I released the movie in the theater, and remember that movie was in 2,000 theaters, I was being regularly attacked on a website called BarackObama.com. That's the president's personal website. So I'm reasonable in thinking that somebody up there was upset by my film. Second, when the FBI developed a file on me and a congressional committee got a hold of my file, they see in there that it's red flagged, Dinesh is a right-wing conservative. Now, see, that shouldn't be in my file, because the whole point is that people who violate the law should be treated the same. Their politics are irrelevant, but the reason that the FBI put that in there is to alert the Justice Department, hey, this is a guy you may want to go after. You know, and that's the thing that troubles me, is that when justice is manipulated so that the scales are tipped.
Who told you that, who from a congressional committee told you that this was in your file?
So what happened was, once the Republicans got control of Congress, a congressional committee asked the Obama administration to give me the file. The usual nonsense from the FBI. Confidential sources, we can't give you the file. So finally they gave the congressional committee the redacted file. And a congressman who saw that file called me, and he goes, number one, your case is a $20,000 violation, but the FBI immediately assigned $100,000 to investigate your case. He said, that's extremely abnormal. So all this rubbish is going on behind closed doors. And now I see it in a bigger scale with Trump. The same thing, the FBI trying to tip the scales. And this is very worrying. I mean, look, the FBI has had a history, but even when J. Edgar Hoover was doing his crazy business taping Martin Luther King, he wouldn't dream of trying to tip the scale of a presidential election.
Can you tell us who that member of Congress was?
Yeah, it's Ron DeSantis in Florida.
And what happened next?
So I'm just saying, the congressional committee was aware that something is fishy in my case. Here's another indication. Judge Berman in New York, a Clinton appointee, as part of my sentence, he sentences me to mandatory psychiatric re-education. Now think about this. I gave money to a college friend running for office. Does this require psychiatric examination? There was a government-appointed psychiatrist in California. When I went to see her, she looked at my case, and she told me after 1 hour of consultation, she goes, you do not need psychiatric counseling. I'm going to write this judge and tell him that he's a loon. And so she wrote him and told him, this man does not need psychiatric education. And the judge said, I'm forcing you to do it anyway. And so I went through a year of this, at the end of which he basically said, I'm not doing this anymore. And the judge threw up his hands and said, okay, let's stop it now. But this is the kind of craziness that I've been living through. So you can understand why my politics have become a little bit more fierce. I lived in an idealistic America where I'm like, these are the Republicans, these are the Democrats, they believe this, as if it was a big debate. But now I actually see that deeper human motives of envy and revenge also play a role in the political process, and so that now influences the way I see the world. Families get separated. I mean, that happens. I mean, I saw that myself. You know, when the Obama administration filed its charges against me, they come to me and they say, you have to plead guilty. And I go, I'm not going to plead guilty. And they go, if you don't plead guilty, we're going to put additional charges on you, essentially re-descriptions of the same offense. But you will face 5 years in federal prison. You will have virtually no contact with your daughter who's going through her college. I mean, so they separate families all the time in this country using the weapons of the judicial system. And so, yes, I totally understand the scope of the tragedy. I'm glad it's being addressed, but I also think ultimately what's needed is a fixing of the laws. Now, in my movies, I interview Robert Paxton, who's a leading progressive, has written a book called The Anatomy of Fascism, would disagree with me on certain things, but I treat him respectfully in the movie. And see, this is what I do, but Michael Moore doesn't do this. Like, Michael Moore wouldn't dream of having me in his movie or having any intelligent conservative. His idea of a movie is to go to Charlton Heston's house at night and ambush him. So he does these kinds of stunts. I don't. I put people, in my America film, I put a procession of people to criticize America to such a degree that if you watch that film for the first 10 minutes, there were conservatives who got up and walked out because they thought this is such a left-wing movie. I was, of course, laying out a thesis that I would then challenge, but the very fairness with which I laid it out would alienate some on the right. So this is the problem, is that there are people on the left who don't want to have this kind of debate. I'm very glad that you do, and I would certainly like to be part of it.